I love bookstores. I love books. But it is a little intimidating to see this many bookstores. I can't. Not only can I read the, it's like when I was in Thailand, I can't even make out what it says by spelling
Not
it out.
Shaddai, but don't get any ideas. Lolita, I did bring Lolita glasses to the photo shoot today. I'm gonna try them on.
Wait, what are Lolita's glasses?
Lolita glasses.
Надеялась, что она скажет.
Which
They're
one?
like,
Wait for it in the remake.
Мои дети сначала маму спросят, а потом я папу спросят. Я на ней тоже была это мечтать. Что вообще прошло? This is the book.
Are there here? Maybe
Yeah, yeah.
corner. Yeah.
Okay, so you're a new fan of the author.
Тебе нужно будет взять тоже стул. Здесь можно сегодня?
Ah, you speak English.
Сняли квартиру.
Were you Russian? No, someone? No?
Ну, так, колокола.
You learned that. Where?
Показал, что чайник Бога не верят, но зато дискотека. Что буквально
I pretty much abandoned Russian when I came here from Russia in '93, but I dove back in last year. Yeah. I must have been yeah. What about reading?
Well, I was.
It's not in the I will not. I'm not a writer.
like the young
Sometimes I write for myself, but I'm not sure. I write for poems.
Right, we're gonna have 5 final minutes, and then we'll begin.
What are we supposed to do?
This is your last chance to grab something to drink or eat, Stas, and then.
Nah, we got it.
Okay.
Sweetie, there's a muffin. It's not a cookie.
All right.
Hi there.
What it is.
How's about a muffin?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned. This is
Muffin
why I'm a little
for
concerned that
There you go.
I'm
These are amazing.
right, thank you.
And they match the book.
They match my bag,
But they match the book.
oh, that's right, they do. I
That's
didn't.
pretty amazing.
I didn't.
Which one? There was the person. Yeah, I could make it. Yeah. I should probably my version.
I
I followed her work for years,
I have it.
but I've only worked.
My son just
But following her work is really inspiring for my own
then I told my
studies
friend
or
he saw like people
reacquaintance with
started
certain
stopping on the
Russian
street
things.
to
Yeah, I
say
read a lot of
how much they enjoy these shoes.
Going back to
And then now he asked me to subtract like
Well, it is what it
Do you guys need? You live in there? I live in
pictures? Oh, you're nice. Yeah, nice. Oh, amazing.
I've been there 20 years.
This is not the best picture.
What's your name? Matteo? Is it Italian in you?
Nice nails. Okay. I'm sure he did.
Yeah, all right. Couple things before we actually start. Could you please check your cell phones and make sure they're all been silenced? Thank you.
I have to leave my own vibrate.
Fine. We will have a dedicated Q&A section. So with that, if you have a question or comment, please raise your hand so Olga or any of our guest speakers today can call you. Okay. Also, we're live streaming this event on our YouTube channel. So if you don't feel like appearing on the video, let me know. There's only the speakers in the first row visible on the screen. Right. Well, good evening and welcome to Globus Books. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, let me introduce you to the place. We are a 55-year-old independent bookstore here in San Francisco. Initially founded as a small publisher and a bookstore, we keep that gold standard of independent book trade going up to this very date. And here you can find uncensored books, books that are not subject to any propaganda, and of course, banned books. Yes, times do repeat themselves. Over the last several years, Globus became an event hub, but also a cultural sanctuary for those members of our diverse immigrant community who speak Belarusian, Russian, Ukrainian, Georgian, and of course our English-speaking neighbors who are sincerely interested in history, culture, and literal translations of those authors who come from Eastern Europe, Central Asia, Caucasus, and pretty much all countries that used to be Soviet Union, but not only. Today is not exception since all three of our speakers are immigrants from Russia. And with that, okay, we're going to take a short break. Miami, it's okay. We're soft starting. You guys, here. Very nice. Sorry, is this okay? It's a family style gathering. Please welcome our guest from New York, Svetlana Satchkova. Svetlana is a journalist with her contributions to the media outlets such as Los Angeles Review of Books, The Independent, Medusa, and many others. She is currently a research fellow at the Jordan Center for the Advanced Study of Russia at NYU. She's also an author. She published 3 novels in Russia and her debut English language novel, The Undead, a novel of a modern Russia. And today Svetlana will be presenting her new book with the help of our 2 main local talents. Please welcome Olga Zilberbourg. Olga is an author of a critically acclaimed book of short stories like Water. She also published 3 novels in Russia. She's a curator for creative writing class and Lit Crawl Festival here in the city. And finally, please welcome Sasha Vasilyuk. I just remembered not one time ago we've been presenting your book here. So Sasha is a journalist with her works in major media outlets such as BBC, the New York Times, LA Times, and many others. She is an author of her debut novel, Your Presence is Mandatory, which won the gold medal of California Book Award and the first prize for Samiror, Jewish Literature of 2025. With that, ladies, shall we? Thank you. Thank you.
So she does most of that by memory, which is like, I don't know how. I'm going to not do that. I'm going to read because I don't have a good memory. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Undead, and then we're going to sort of pummel her with questions.
First read.
And yeah, she'll read, we'll pummel her with questions, and then we'll give you time to ask whatever you guys want. Svetlana's debut English language novel, The Undead, is to me about the price of being apolitical in a place where maybe you shouldn't be or should be. We'll discuss that. In an increasingly authoritarian state. The protagonist, Maya, is a 30-something debut film director. She's making kind of like a lo-fi movie about ghouls led by an undead Lenin. That's her premise. It's Moscow circa 2017. And the film, it's supposed to be a bit of a romp and is very much meant to be apolitical in her mind. As an artist, Maya believes it's important to stay out of politics, which is very typical in, I would say, Russian circles in general. The problem is politics does not plan to stay out of Maya's life. After all, just because you shut your eyes doesn't mean that the ghouls won't get you. And with that, I wanted to ask Svetlana to read us a little passage to get a feel for the text.
First of all, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Anastasia, for hosting this amazing event. I'm very pleased and honored to be here. So I'm going to read a passage. It's going to be dark. I'm just going to warn you. The novel is not. It's actually a humorous description. It's like sometimes very light. Description of people living in Moscow. And the first half of the novel is actually what my American editor, described as Moscow hipsters making a movie and having sex. That's his take on it. So, people are making a movie, enjoying themselves, they're making art. Moscow is amazing, there's cultural life, there are wonderful restaurants, what's not to like, right? The trouble is they're not noticing all the terrible things that are happening until the next morning. Maya was jolted awake by someone banging on her front door. Glancing at the clock, she saw it was only 5 a.m. Groggily, she shuffled to the front hall and looked through the peephole. An old lady stood there, a ring of white hair around her anxious face. "What is it?" Maya said through the door. "I'm your downstairs neighbor," the old lady replied in a high-pitched voice, straining to be heard. "My ceiling is leaking. The water is coming from your apartment." "It can't be. Everything's turned off in here." "No, it's definitely coming from your apartment. Let me in." Feeling woozy from the pills she'd taken, Maya figured it would be easier to just open the door and let the old lady see for herself. She unlocked the door, but no old lady emerged through it. Instead, chaos erupted. Policemen in bulletproof vests, armed with semi-automatic rifles and wearing black balaclavas, flooded her front hall and spilled into the rest of her apartment, creating an overwhelming racket. Moments later, Maya found herself lying face down on the floor, her hands cuffed behind her back. "This is a search operation," a voice said above her. "Here's the warrant." A piece of paper was shoved into her face. She couldn't read what was written on it because it was held too close, and one of her eyes was pressed into the floor. "Okay," she said. Her brain didn't seem to be working as it should. Thankfully, she was soon propped in a chair next to the kitchen table, her hands free. The masked policemen, there had to be around 6 of them, were ransacking her apartment, pulling items out of drawers and closets and tossing them onto the floor. A 30-ish man took a seat across from Maya, placing some papers and a pen in front of him. He wore an officer's uniform, though it didn't appear to be a police uniform as far as she could tell. Stunned to the point where she couldn't find the words to ask him what was going on, she simply stared at his face. He had wispy reddish hair, almost no eyebrows, small, nearly translucent eyes, and a large glistening nose. The overall effect was jarring, suggesting not years of study and self-discipline, but a life spent on cheap beer, watching TV, and teaching swear words to a pet parrot. The man gave her a long, intense look, then cleared his throat and said in a businesslike tone, "I'm Major Yunusov, a chief investigator at the investigative committee. As I mentioned, we're conducting a search of your apartment. Once we're finished, I'll be taking you in for questioning." "Taking me where?" Maya asked, her voice sounding hoarse and deep. She wouldn't recognize it on the recording. "To the office of the investigative committee." She studied him some more, again seized by muteness. Major Yunusov was playing with his pen, twirling it between two fingers. There was a large mole on his thumb. "And what is this in connection with?" This line had likely come to Maya from one of the movies she'd seen. Her brain felt frozen, unable to produce anything original. The presence of men in the next room, rummaging through her belongings and making loud cracking noises, left her feeling physically violated. "You'll find out soon enough. Please be patient." Major Yunusov didn't sound confrontational or irritated. It was just another day on the job for him. One of the masked policemen searching her apartment brought Maya's laptop and iPhone over, placing both on the table. Yunusov opened the laptop and hit a few keys before activating her phone, which prompted him for the password. "I need you to give me the passwords to your computer and phone," he said. Maya had no idea if she had the right to refuse him access to her devices. From his tone, however, she sensed that this was something he couldn't demand from her. She shook her head no. "Fine, I'll make a note of this in the protocol." "I need to speak to a lawyer," Maya said. Another helpful line from a movie, no doubt. "Do you have one?" "No." "You're welcome to find yourself a lawyer after we're done with the questioning. Otherwise, the state will provide you with one, free of charge." 2 hours stretched on interminably before Maya was handed a search protocol to read and sign. Written in chicken scratch, it was impossible to decipher, so she had to ask Yunusov to explain what it said. 2 young men in civilian clothes, who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere and were introduced as witnesses, signed the document alongside her. Yunusov informed her that they were confiscating her phone, computer, and several notebooks filled with notes she had taken while working on her movie. This had to be connected to Krasov, Maya thought, which meant that the situation would be sorted out soon. Their relationship had been strictly professional, and they'd never discussed dogs or politics, except for that one time when she'd mentioned that she stayed away from politics. Maybe she wouldn't even need a lawyer. Then Yunusov told her to get dressed, and Maya noticed that she was still wearing her old bathrobe with a pattern of oranges. "Take a few things with you just in case," he suggested. "What kind of things?" He looked at her as if she were dense. "Underwear, a toothbrush, some personal hygiene products." He yawned, his eyes tearing up. "A book to pass the time." This was when fear finally caught up with Maya. Major Yunusov was implying that he could put her in jail tonight. Her throat tightened as she realized that the sudden raid could be the beginning of something much more ominous. Panicking, she began searching for her backpack, but for a few minutes, she just bumped around her apartment ineffectually, unable to find her belongings in their usual spots. Finally, she had to ask the policeman if they had seen the backpack, and eventually spotted it under a pile of clothes on the floor.
So I think, as you guys can see, the writing is very colorful, very cinematic. We're following everything that's going on. There's a lot of a lot of drama. And even though you were saying like this is about halfway through the book, right? Even though before that there's no like dudes with guns busting in someone's house, I would say like the cinematic aspect and the drama was there the whole time. I want us to start with talking about Maya. Kind of tell us who she is as a character, where she came from into your head. And I also wanted to kind of add on question to it. So Maya has a girlfriend named Lena that used to work together. And Maya is not based on you, but Lena, the friend who eventually leaves to the States, is somewhat autobiographical to you. So I wanted to kind of have you tell everyone about Maya, and then also discuss kind of why there's a friendship and what that meant to you to have one in there.
Maybe I'll start with the actual friend, because Maya is based on a real person. Actually, I should start by saying that every character in this novel is based on a real person. If people are familiar with contemporary Russian cinema, for example, you will recognize most of them. There are some very famous ones. I changed their last names and first names sometimes because I didn't want, I don't know, Nikita Mikhalkov to come for me. He's a very powerful man, you know. So, yeah, but you will certainly recognize him if you know who he is. And Maya herself is based on a friend I had in Moscow. Maybe I still have her, even though we stopped talking for reasons that have nothing to do with this novel. So, you know, we met each other, I would say like 20 years ago. We were journalists at the time, but she wanted to make films. That was her life's dream. And eventually she, you know, just quit her job and put all her savings into a graduate program in film. Maybe some of you will recognize it, ВКСР. It's высшие курсы сценаристов и режиссеров. While she studied there, it's a 2-year program. She was considered a genius by everyone, by her professors and her classmates. Everyone thought that she would go on to, you know, do great things. And she signed with the producer immediately after the program and started filming her movie, which she wrote herself. I was in that movie too, by the way, just because I was her friend. And I was like, I was there. I was on the set. I spoke to everyone, and it was like such an exciting time. I mean, when people are making a movie, especially if it's a passion project, it's incredible. It's just, you know, you're overwhelmed. It's very exciting. And after she finished filming, the producer started stalling on the money for post-production, which was kind of strange because no reason was given. She tried to confront him many times over first several months, but then it stretched into 2 years. And she would say, you do not want to finish this movie? Or like, what is happening? He was like, what are you talking about? Of course I want to finish it. But nothing was happening. And I asked her, like, give me his number. I'm going to call him. You know, like, what is he doing? And, you know, nothing was happening. And then one of the principal actors, it's also, everything is based on real events. So he was and still is a very colorful character. He was always involved in some scandals. Well, eventually he did something that was too much even for Russia. Mm-hmm. You know, like in Russia, people kind of, you know, look the other way when you do something, you know, untasteful, distasteful, or whatever, unsavory. Mm-hmm. But this was too much even for Russia. And, you know, for those of you who read the book, you will find out. It sounded so implausible, actually, that my American editor, he made a note on the margins. He was like, this is too implausible. This is what he said. And I responded with a proof link. With a link. Because it really happened, you know, like you can read about it. It was shown on Channel 1, you know, the most important Russian channel, which is like, you know. So after this, he became blacklisted, and it became evident to everyone that the movie would never come out. And this became a tragedy for my friend. For some reason, she never recovered from it. Her classmates, you know, went on to have great careers. Their films went to film festivals around the world, and she never made another movie. She's never written anything again. She got married, had a child, and completely dissolved her domestic life. There's nothing wrong with this, of course, but for someone whose life's dream was to make movies, I think it was tragic. So when I started writing this novel, this is what I wanted to explore. And I just got distracted, sorry. So this is what I wanted to explore, a personal tragedy of a creative person who wanted to make art, but stopped when she experienced this massive failure. And I started writing the novel, and she started having various conversations with people. And because my real life friend was apolitical, she's always been like that, and we had numerous conversations over the years where I tried to challenge her and tell her, all of these terrible things are happening in our country. There's like massive corruption, there's no freedom of speech to speak of. People are thrown into jail without, proper trials. The courts are corrupt. People are getting killed, like journalists are getting killed. And she would be like, well, I don't know about this. Maybe it's not true. Also, it has like no relevance to my life. And this is typical for Russia, I would say, right? I think you would agree. Like, people are trying to ignore reality and to kind of form a bubble around themselves where they go to nice restaurants, where they, travel the world, where they, make their art, or they have nice jobs, or I don't know what. And they're trying to ignore this whole chunk of reality, thinking that it has nothing to do with them. And they only confront it when something happens either to them or to someone they know. And there are a lot of people like that, as I mentioned. And Maya, my character, was the same way because she was based on my friend, real life person. And she started having these conversations in the novel about politics. People kept challenging her. And this topic, because it's so important to me, it started to grow. And while I was writing the novel, the trial of Berkovich and Petrichuk happened, which is a very high-profile political trial over two women, a playwright and theater director. And I was so outraged by the whole thing that I realized I wanted to write about it. So this became the inspiration for what happens to Maya.
And I think you do this so well, where you both you take this character who is experiencing a professional and personal crises, and you also put her in a very particular political moment, and you turn that moment around her completely, and it sort of. And it's so convincing that I think this must have affected the real person as well. This is why people do fall silent in Russia, even when they have the whole world open to them, because they don't know how to turn their work into commentary, or how to do their art without commenting. But I really love this book. There's so many things to talk about in here, and this character is so rich, and the world around her is so rich. But the movie industry is a big part of it. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what your background with the movie industry. I was just on the way over, I was just talking to friends and saying, like, I don't really follow movies, but I follow movies enough to have recognized the directors mentioned here, and you represent them in all of the insanity that that their public image warranties. But yeah, I'm really curious to hear you talk more about your background with this.
So for years, I worked as a culture journalist in Moscow. I came here in 2016, and before that, for almost 15 years, I wrote about culture for glossy magazines. And actually, that choice was political because I was like Maya in many ways. Even though I did not ignore reality, I kind of stared it in the face, but I was too scared to say anything in public or to even go to protests or to participate in any kind of political life because for a long time I was a single mom, for example, and my family lives here in the States, so I was alone. What if something happened to me, I thought, and what would happen to my son then, for example. And so the choice to become a culture journalist was actually a conscious decision because I was too scared to report on politics or social issues or something like that because journalists who reported on those issues faced persecution from the state. And so I reported mostly on the film industry, also on theater and music, etc. But I wrote about film. I traveled to film festivals around the world, but mostly I concentrated on the Russian film industry. I interviewed all the major directors and actors, many of them, countless times over the years. And I went to film sets and I watched movies being made. So I kind of gained insider knowledge.
I feel like you did have lunch with Helen Mirren.
Yes,
I'll say that. She's like, yeah, it was mostly Russians, but also like yesterday she's like, oh right, that time I went to interview Antonio Banderas in Argentina. I was like, oh, no. Sorry, continue.
So anyway, where was I? Yeah, but also only when I was already writing this novel, I realized how fortunate I was that I actually picked the film industry because also it's a great, art form to explore complicity because maybe not everyone knows this fact, but the Russian film industry is funded almost entirely by the state. So it was like that during the Soviet times, and in contemporary Russia, it still continues to be this way because 99% of the movies that are being made inside of Russia are funded by the state, either through the Cinema Foundation, this is an organization, or Ministry of Culture, or even when it's funded by private money. If you investigate this further, you find that this private money comes from large corporations, and the state is a major stakeholder in those corporations, like Gazprom, for example, or something like that. So essentially, everyone who makes movies in Russia, unless they're, trying to do something completely independent and they ask their friends to, contribute to the filming of their movie. So everyone who's making movies in Russia is taking money from the state. So it's, as I said, it's like a great opportunity to explore how people explain to themselves, for example, their involvement with the state. Like some people are just, greedily taking the money and making huge patriotic movies that glorify the Russian state, the war, or the Soviet Union, which kind of became synonymous with modern Russia in Putin's eyes, at least. There are some people who are saying, well, I need to feed my family, so maybe I'll just, make, kind family style movies, and maybe that's not so bad, or I don't know. So there's this whole spectrum, right, of people who are, taking money from the state, but in different ways, and maybe some of them are cynical, and some of them are still trying to think of themselves as decent people who are just, minding their business. So I think this is like a very fruitful kind of field for this type of discussion. And I'm trying to, in my novel, at least I tried to touch on all of these strategies that people employ in Russia, in the film industry, but also I think it pertains to every other industry as well.
Complicity is a great word to describe the novel. If in one word, what the novel is about is probably, I would say, different forms of complicity. And what's also really interesting about it is that it catches Russia in a very particular moment in time. And because taking money from the state actually meant fairly different things in early 2000s versus after 2017, the moment that you described. At first, I think Russia was funding a lot of different kinds of projects, and criticism of Russia was welcomed and channeled in particular ways. I think this is my take on how early Putin era propaganda worked, is that there was a there was work for all of the disgruntled creators to produce their own form of disgruntlement, but things changed. Things started to really change after Putin came back as president, after Medvedev. Remember that interlude of Medvedev, and then when Putin came back in 2012, and his return was met with pretty gigantic protests for Russia. And the state didn't find they were out of creative ideas at that point of how to funnel the support for Putin, and so they started cracking down, and they started cracking down even more in 20. So after they they took out a chunk of Ukraine, right? Like they attacked the Ukraine in 2014, right? And then the protest increased, and then they had to increase the forms of stopping the protest. And in 2017, you described this moment with the trial of Kirill Serebrennikov. That's where sort of the novel begins, right? Where they, for the first time, they arrested a cultural leader, like a leader of sort of the free, independent culture. He took a lot of money from the state, but with that, he participated in modernity, and he participated in queer culture, in like Western projects with a lot of Western involvement, Western money, and he allowed himself to be quite critical of Putin and his apparatus, and his arrest under very bogus charges was the signal to the whole artistic community. This is no longer allowed. So the sort of unstated or half-stated agreement between the creators and the people in power changed. And so this is where we pick up with Maya, who is 35, a very proud graduate of the film school, working on her first movie. Her movie, so like the way it describes, she's creating a zombie Lenin who comes back from the dead to attack the Kremlin for no particular reason, right? Or just to horrify.
Not even Kremlin. It
Right.
doesn't say.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's just he has an army of followers, and they invade Moscow. So that's the extent to which I described the
Typical zombie
plot of
invasion.
the movie. Yeah. So maybe I should talk about where this idea came from, because
Yeah, sure.
my
Mhm.
friend
Because it's on the cover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
my friend in real life, she was not making a zombie film. She was making a dramedy, and because I couldn't obviously plagiarize it, I started making up my own scenes from a dramedy, an imaginary dramedy that my character Maya was making. But somehow they were coming out kind of flat and uninteresting, which maybe reflects on my skills as a writer. Yeah, I mean, that's completely possible. But I thought, how can I make this more fun for myself and also for my readers? So actually, my husband, I think, came up with this zombie Lenin idea. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll run with it and see what happens. And then somehow it grew. And also it grew in meaning, because Lena, whose character is based on myself, so she is Maya's best friend who eventually decides to immigrate to the United States. She has this conversation with Maya that completely repeated the conversations that I had with my friend and other friends. And I loved Moscow. I used to love Moscow to death. basically. I returned from, well, maybe I should go a little bit into my personal history. So the first time I came to the United States was in 1992. After I finished high school, I came with my family. My father got a job in the United States. He worked in maritime shipping. And I came here and I studied at NYU. I studied philosophy. And then when I got my bachelor's 4 years later, I returned to Moscow, even though my family stayed in the United States. And I can't tell you why I did it. There was no rational reason, but I wanted to be in Moscow. I loved Moscow as a human being almost. And I went to Moscow, became a journalist, a writer, etc. I loved it, continued to love it. But then, I had this feeling that I started to get this feeling that it didn't belong to me anymore or to any other people like me. And what I said to my friends was, Moscow was taken from me. It was seized by ghouls. That's the word I actually used. And by ghouls, I meant anyone involved in Putin's repressive apparatus. I don't know, like people from the FSB, the police, all his officials who've stolen, money from the people of Russia and became staggeringly wealthy. And I realized when I started writing this zombie film that, it became a metaphor, which I myself used years ago. And, I said ghouls, meaning anyone involved with Putin in some way, but also you could talk about the undead being everyone who's brainwashed by the Russian propaganda, for example.
And this is and you use this metaphor, but Maya doesn't quite get there, right? Maya doesn't quite connect the dots yet in her political evolution and in her evolution as a thinker, as a creator. She doesn't quite connect the dots, and towards the end, she sort of that becomes for her a big part of stumbling block in her relationship with her work. But so one of the most provocative questions I think about Maya is that you do set her up as this character who does not want to do anything with politics. She says, "I'm not paying attention." She gets news about these political changes from her conversations with friends. She doesn't read the news. She doesn't, willingly look for these conversations. They come to her. And, it's interesting. So for me, as I was reading, I feel like the question that is foremost is Maya's refusal to participate. Is it her moral failure? Are we asked to read it as a moral failure of a character, or is this something else? Can we interpret it as something else? And what is right? What is so? Let me put it this way: like most of us as creators, we want to be free to choose our topics. What we write about, what we choose to pay attention to. Maya feels like everyone around her wants her to focus on politics, make her movie political, and she resists this pressure. And in many ways, Maya is a very, she's a very authentic character, because she stays true to her convictions when she doesn't try to become a resistance fighter after she's arrested and gets this cloud of somebody who has been prosecuted for her artistic statements. She doesn't use that for fame and as a protester. She doesn't try to become a leader. She said, I don't know anything about politics. I don't get involved. So in a way, she's also really authentic to herself. She stays true, convicted to her ideas. But I couldn't miss. I mean, you do dedicate the book to Alexei Navalny and the all the political prisoners, past and present, who were tortured for 3 years, imprisoned in life. But yeah, so how intentional were you with this moral dilemma, setting us up for this quest of what is the right thing to do when living under authoritarian government or under any government?
Can I Can I add one thing? Just from I'm going to quote. This is a conversation between Maya and another person. They're both in film school. It's like very early in the book, but I think it's going to add a little bit. So the other woman says, "You're supposed to be an intellectual. You're a film director," she said. "An intellectual cannot be apolitical." "Not true," Maya said. "Look at Tony." This is another film dude. All his life, he made movies about love and death and grief and friendship, the eternal things. He keeps clear of politics. Is he not an intellectual? And I think that's, I think about this all the time now. Are we now, okay, we live in the state, shit's not going well, in this country either. Does that make us as artists, does it give us an obligation to write about it? Or a lot of people are doing, no, let's not. This is, things will pass, or whatever, however people think about it. Or no, the human condition is more important to write about and more valuable.
I have so much to say about
Okay,
this.
great.
The reason I dedicated this novel to Alexei Navalny is because he's my hero, obviously. I admire him. When I learned that he died, I cried for at least a week. And but I myself was never a freedom fighter. I'm not a hero. The choice that I made was to leave the country. That was the best I could do. I couldn't fight. I didn't have the means, and I was never a brave person. So I'm not prepared to pass judgment on other people for their choices, such as to stay silent, for example, not to make movies about how horrible Putin is and all of his followers. But at the same time, I am passing judgment on those people who refuse to recognize what's happening. So what I'm trying to say is that I don't think creators have an obligation to necessarily make movies and write books that are part of the resistance, that are talking about the horrors of authoritarianism, etc. But at least as people, I think we have an obligation to not say, "Oh, things are complicated," they say in Russian, "Всё не так однозначно." It's a catchphrase that to people who don't speak Russian, it describes the state where you doubt everything, where there's no right and wrong.
Nothing is true.
Yeah, nothing is true.
possible.
Anything is possible. Exactly, because you're not willing to say that this is evil, for example, or So I guess I'm speaking out in this book against people who are trying to ignore what's happening and continue living their lives as if certain things don't exist. Although I myself make an argument, it's just a theory, that maybe it's people's brains trying to protect them, because when reality is so terrifying, what can you do? You just you're trying to adapt to it in various ways, and maybe one of the ways is just to decide that it doesn't exist. It's I'm just, this is the life that we have, and things have always been, not so great. I don't know.
The coping strategy.
Right, the coping strategy, exactly.
What's weird, I think there's a gradation with any, an authoritarian, right? There's kind of levels of it, and it's usually, it starts like this, and then kind of, or at least in Russia, it's been like this, and then it just gets crazier and crazier and crazier, and at some point at some point it gets so crazy that you kind of have to decide. But what's interesting to me is that a relative of mine recently, who also works in the film industry, and his wife also, they left Russia soon after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And then at some point, they had to go back and kind of deal with some stuff, documents, selling their house, whatever. And they were there for a short period of time. so this is like maybe a year ago, something like that, not that long ago. And I was asking him, I was like, so what's it like? You know, because there's become like a wall to it. It's very hard to know what life is like there. And I remember you telling me constantly that you see friends on Instagram, like former friends from Moscow, living this high life. And I'm like, that can't be true. I don't know. I didn't believe it. And then this relative of mine went to Moscow, and he described the same thing. He's like, everyone was just partying and sitting at, like, all the restaurants are full. And in the film industry, I think because so many people left, like so much talent left the country, when he got back, people were just like shoving projects, like, please do this thing, like, please write this script for this TV show, and paying like insane money. Because also, like, money is generated through war in various ways.
And also because you can't show Western movies now because Russia is
and they need to entertain
Of
these
course.
people so they can, like, not go to protests, whatever, you know. They got, like, something. And I just, and at that point, like, you have to be like, okay, are you still protecting? Like, at which point can you judge people? Can you feel like you're a coward? At which point, I don't know, right? Like, I don't know the answer. But anyway.
Well,
just wanted to add that.
One thing about Maya is that I feel like you give us enough room in the novel that I did not judge her at all. She's so active. She's such an active agent in her life, and she fights her own battles, and she certainly has battles to fight. She's very aware. She's like, I'm a woman over 35 in the film industry that, you know, that's run by men and privileges, you know, younger women for, you know, for their looks and nothing else, right? And she's very aware of trying to insert herself and her point of view and her, you know, and her creativity into that toxic space. She's I mean, one of the, you know, you present this power dynamic really well, and you know, the power structures, like the male characters are so creepy, and like so, like, but also like believable, like very, very real, very full characters. She has a stalker that she befriends because yeah, I mean, I don't I should let you talk about these, but my question is generally how, you know, what, you know, so I mean, let me ask you in this way, like, do you consider this as a feminist novel or are you is there like, or like, how conscious were you about writing these men as creeps, the patriarchy as in the service of the government in general? Yeah.
I mean, I hate to say it, I'm completely clueless because only now I'm realizing that I've written a somewhat feminist novel. I didn't set out to do that, but I think the result is pretty obvious, yes, because men are creepy, they hold these power positions, and Maya is very conscious of like how she's supposed to play that, because going out for this meeting with the producer, she's like, what should I wear? Maybe something tight. And maybe I should like laugh in a silly way, because she wants to kind of appeal to like his male ego, I guess.
She's very clued into how she uses her power, like her, you know, like, and she's very and she's skilled at doing that, which only adds to her power. So she gets quite far and quite impressively. She's able to manipulate, you know, well, manipulate is the wrong word here because it comes from the culture of patriarchy, but she's able to accomplish her goals by presenting herself in a certain way to certain people.
But at the same time, she's not as successful as her nemesis, Ksenia, right? Who's able to like reach great heights, and you know, because she's much more successful as a woman, also not just as an actress and director, but as someone who can manipulate other people.
How do you like? What's the difference between Maya and Ksenia? Like, what separates them?
Maya is not cynical. I think Ksenia is very cynical, and she's a complete narcissist, also taken from real life. She's a real person with a different name. She's quite successful in Russia now. Yes, and Maya is just,
So her authenticity is holding her back.
Yeah.
She's true. She uses her power, but she's also she is true to herself too. So she's not gonna say or do things that she doesn't fully believe in. Actually, which is really like a fascinating combination of character traits. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, because we have some writers in the room, about a couple of like writing and publishing questions. So one was, I happened to be the lucky girl who saw an earlier draft of this book where you were experimenting with kind of sort of supernatural-ish elements that you were thinking about adding or not. And I guess generally this is like a literary thriller. That's kind of how it's pegged. Was it always a thriller in your mind? And if not, like when did you cross over to the thriller territory? And also like just talk about the experimentation with the supernatural.
I'm still not sure that this is a thriller. I mean,
Right, I know.
I've heard some people call it that, but maybe I have not, I'm not widely read, I guess. I have not read a lot of thrillers. I mean, in my mind, this is just realistic fiction. But the earlier version, I would describe them not as supernatural elements, but maybe as sort of like my experience of sort of psychosis. So I tried to, because she was making a horror movie, I tried to insert kind of like horror elements into my novel, but ultimately that didn't work. And also, I think one of the reasons, because I'm just used to writing psychological realism, and that's the genre I read in. So, I tried to cross over to someone else's territory, I think, and I realized it didn't work, so I just went back to, yeah.
And then my other question was about publishing. So this is one of the only novels today in the US that's about Russia, that's about modern Russia. There's more nonfiction books that have been coming out, but, fiction-wise, like I can't think of very many in the past couple of years. So since you're in this lucky position to be the chosen one to represent this country, that's, having a really bad image issue. Just what has been your experience, if you want to share that, and what has been feedback that you received? Because it came out in January, so you've had like a few months to hear.
Honestly,
hate mail or love mail or whatever.
Honestly, I have not received any hate mail except for this one email, which I have no idea where it came from, but it said something, I don't remember, but I kind of thought that it came from the FSB or something. Like they called me like a dirty traitor or something like that. I was like, they noticed me, but maybe that was just like wishful thinking on my part. For certain people, it's a badge of honor, but honestly, I would prefer for them not to notice me. Yeah. But I published this book by accident, which you know the story. When I finished the manuscript, I didn't have time to query agents, which is the process that every writer goes through in the United States, almost every writer. So when you finish a manuscript, you then have to find yourself an agent. And to find yourself an agent, you usually write, hundreds of emails to various agents, telling them about your project. So I was going to do that. But before I had a chance to do that, I went to a literary party in New York, and I started talking to some guy in glasses. Like, I had no idea who he was, and we just kind of, had a conversation. He started asking me questions. I told him I was a writer from Russia, how I came to the United States because living under Putin's regime had become unsustainable for me. And he was like, so do you have anything? Have you written anything? I was like, yeah, as a matter of fact, I just finished the manuscript. And he goes, well, do you want me to take a look at it? And I was like, who are you? Because he only introduced himself as Mike at that point. And he said, I'm an editor at Melville House. Have you heard of this press? And I was like, yeah, of course I have. It's a small press, an independent press, but it's kind of prestigious. So of course I've heard about it. And he gave me his email, but also he told me not to get my hopes up. He was like, I'm probably gonna read it for, I don't know, 6 months. So don't change your plans on my account, query agents. So the next day I sent him the file and I completely forgot about it, like honest to God, because he just made this impression on me that he's not gonna read it. And 5 days later, he called me and he offered me the contract. So this was my experience. I decided to take his offer, because this does not qualify me to speak about experience of Russian writers writing about Russia and how they're treated by the publishing industry. Who knows? Well, I can say this, that before that I tried to publish short stories and have not had like any luck with them. Maybe they just didn't fit the outlets that I pitched them to, or maybe there was a certain reluctance to publish Russian authors. But who knows? Like, I will never know.
No one
because
ever tells you, yeah.
Yeah, no one will ever tell you. So
Maybe
The
I'll
lesson is go to more parties, right?
Write that down. Mike, you say.
Mike.
Mike,
Glasses. I'll ask one more question and then maybe we'll go to the audience questions. But I do want to ask you about another question about your experience as a writer, because so you worked as a writer and journalist in Russia. You published 3 novels. I read the last one, Люди и птицы, не перепутать. И видно, что есть окрема листья, люди деревья. Sorry. People and Birds, and it's a wonderful novel which is set sort of in the similar time frame, and you have one character staying in Russia and one character leaving Russia, which I think actually
You're like, oh wait, I didn't
presages some of the conflicts here too. And clearly this decision was not easily taken, but you did move to the US and got an MFA from Brooklyn College. And so I have so many questions about the experience. Did your Russian novels help you write the American one? What did the MFA experience give you? What were some of the challenges of the process? And is there a way to compare the industries, or anyway, just what is it like being a writer in Russia versus a writer in the US?
First of all, the difference between the publishing industry here and in Russia, even though Russia is the biggest country in the world, right? If you judge by territory, the publishing industry is tiny. It's like tiny. People from America cannot even imagine it. So they have only one publishing conglomerate that owns almost every imprint that exists there. And also among imprints that publish, for example, psychological realism, contemporary literature, I know all the people who work there. There are only maybe, 7 editors who buy contemporary novels. So for example, if you get a rejection from all 7 of them, you have no choice. Basically, you either wait until one of them loses their job or dies or something, I don't know, or you just self-publish. And here in the States, the publishing industry is huge. You literally can query agents for years and submit your novels to there are so many imprints and presses and whatnot. So that's the difference. And also the publishing industry here is much more professional. Like in Russia, it's all very informal and people make stupid mistakes. Like, for example, there was this famous case where a famous author was publishing her, not her first novel, but maybe her 5th novel. And the editor, who also happened to be my editor at Exmo, by the way, who published People and Birds, she just sent the wrong file to the printers. And the book was printed, and then the whole print run had to be destroyed because it was one of the early drafts or something. And something similar to that happened to me, actually. I mean, I don't want to go into details, but it's it's run by people who don't know what they're doing. Basically, I don't want to shit on them, but I guess this is what I'm doing. So, and as far as the MFA goes, I think I went to get an MFA in the States because I wanted to get sort of connected, because I came here in my 40s. I came to the United States knowing no one, basically. And to become a writer, I thought I had to like acquaint myself with, I don't know, the business or like with people, also to create community of like-minded people. And actually, one of my MFA colleagues is here with me, and also another writer who I've met at a residency in Brooklyn, at a writing residency. So this is, I think, the most important thing that you get out of an MFA, because when I got into the program, I believe I already could write, because I've already written 3 novels, and it doesn't matter if it's like in Russian or in English. You just, you know, the basic things, plot, structure, you know, style, everything. And you can apply them even if you switch languages, right?
I like how she like casually is like, so I write into languages and, you know, just apply them to this other language. That's not my first.
I did it out of necessity. It's not like, you know, I just decided on a whim, like, you know, Jhumpa Lahiri, right?
Yeah,
She
the
loves
Italian.
Italian,
Yes, yes.
and she started writing in Italian because it's like her pet project or something. But I started writing in English out of necessity, because I'm here, and I think that my audience is here, and I want to speak to people who, you know, live here and around the world, and I just, you know,
Thank you.
And yeah, I'm very grateful that you're here.
thank you so much. Thank you.
I have more questions, but I wanted to give you guys a chance to ask anything and everything.
Yeah, I actually have a question. Ever since the war started, there is a surge of literature that is written in the autofiction manner. Why did you decide to go with the fiction, since 99% of the events and people in this novel are not fictional at all? They're real.
What a wonderful question. And again, I have to say that I just didn't think of it. It's like there was not a conscious like thought process where I was deciding if I should write like an autofictional something or a fictional something. My very first novel that I wrote in, I don't know, 1999, I think, or maybe 1998, and it came out in the year 2000. That was autofictional because I was a very young person. I didn't know things about the world. I knew about myself, and I think it was very natural for a young person who is just starting out to write in the genre of autofiction, even though at that time I didn't know this word, of course. But after that, with my second novel, I started writing straight up fiction novels, even though I base a lot of characters on people I know. I use a lot of stories, I'm sure my husband resents me for using his stories, and my People and Birds, by the way, the character of Tanya is based completely on a real person, and Sasha, the other character, he's kind of a combination of several people. And I had this experience when a friend of mine stopped talking to me forever because I kind of used him in a novel as a character, but most people, you know, are fine with it.
Do you ask them before you do it?
No.
I made that mistake. I just asked somebody.
Of course not.
But writers have always done this. Like, you know,
I know. I should have not.
it's like, of course I'm going to use you in my fiction. Like, don't be friends with me. Although I think there's kind of an ethical thing to do if you're using other writer friend, like another writer. If your friend is a writer, you have to ask them first because maybe they want to use their own story
Yeah,
for
I
their
think
fiction.
this is my situation.
Yeah.
But do you consider yourself first a journalist or a writer?
Or
A
not.
writer,
A writer.
because first I wrote the novel that I just described in 1998 or 9, and then after it came out, a friend of mine showed it to another friend who happened to be the editor of a big glossy magazine. And she said, okay, you can write. Do you want to write for us? And that's how I branched out into writing for magazines.
Yeah, usually
So
it goes
I
the
became,
other way around.
I
Yeah,
became
yeah.
a novelist first, and then a journalist.
Yeah, I really enjoy your opinion writing for the media outlets. For me, it was not enough opinion in this book, but since you admitted you wrote it for the English-speaking audience, what is your major message to them for the book?
I don't have a message.
You don't?
Actually, I spoke about this, I think, with Sasha a little bit, because I don't believe that a writer has to have a message if we're speaking about novels, right? So there are two schools of thought about this, the Tolstoy school and the Chekhov school. So Tolstoy, of course, thought about himself as like the spiritual leader. He told people what to do, and he like argued for his opinions. And Chekhov believed that a writer just has to pose questions and to tell stories and to sort of offer topics for people to reflect on. So I think I belong to that school of thought.
To Chekhov?
To Chekhov. I
So
mean,
wh-
I'm not comparing myself
But
to
what
Chekhov,
question?
obviously.
What question did you plant in this book?
Well, about there are so many questions. I mean, there are questions about, artists and their art. Like, how should we make art in this world, for example? What should we do? Or do we have obligations as writers or filmmakers? How do we live in authoritarian state? What do we do? What are the strategies that we employ? I mean, when do you become complicit?
What's the ethical way to survive? And
Is there an ethical
Right,
way
is
to
there,
survive?
When you were reading the scene that you read, I read this book before the ice thing got really crazy, and so and all of a sudden as you were reading it, with the masked men like pulling it, I was like, oh my god, ice! Like it just sorry, random quote, but it feels like so relevant to America, like more than maybe it was when you were writing it. It oddly
I agree.
became the things that are starting to be recognizable to Americans.
Yes, Sarah. Anybody have questions?
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a. So when I read a book, I sometimes it just felt physically painful because it just felt so like recognizable. Like I knew what's gonna happen and it would happen because it's how it would be happening there. And then I thought that it probably should be like widely read by people who know Russia only from news, right? And I was wondering, do you have any? I mean, I would make it an obligatory reading for everyone, just to know who like really needs to know, because I read so many crazy things about like for people who have no idea what's happening there. But did you have any interesting feedback from like non-Russian speaking people about this book, who's like, oh no, I didn't know it's like this, or who are surprised and learned something from it?
I mean, not to invent things, I don't think I have,
No?
honestly. Yeah, maybe because this book is read by people who have an interest in Russia, mostly, I guess, or those people who they don't write to me, they don't read reviews. Like, how would I know about this? I mean, all of my friends obviously know me.
Yeah, no, me.
We've discussed the book
Mhm.
as I was writing it, so they're kind of, insiders already. But it would be interesting.
Yeah.
To
So I
find out,
was like, because people, I think people would really learn things, and they should, honestly.
this is our challenges, right? Creators in the American space. Everyone is so compartmentalized, and for a book to reach audiences outside of people who are in your niche, it's takes creativity, extra amounts of creativity and great publicity.
Yeah.
And like
Also, to speak of, because we spoke about the American publishing industry, if you publish your book at a small press, you agree in a sense to there not being a lot of publicity for your book, because they don't have the same resources as bigger publishing houses. And for example, I was stunned to learn this fact. Apparently, it's a fact that if your book comes out from a small independent publisher, such outlets as the New York Times do not review it as a rule. It's like a tacit understanding. So I don't know. It's pure chance if some reviewer likes it or whatever.
I've actually heard from, I forget who, somebody in the publishing industry who said that they consider when a book made it when it goes beyond the markets that they expect it to reach.
Mhm.
So like if it goes beyond like people who care about Russia or whatever the market
Right.
is, you know,
That's interesting.
then
That's
it's like,
the sign
oh, then
that-
yeah. It's like, oh, that's an interesting way to think about it.
Tell your friends, buy copies, buy a couple copies, tell your friends.
Tell your friends who have no interest in Russia
Right.
whatsoever.
Yeah, this is just
Leave
it is-
reviews.
but it is a great book, and I think it does tell us about about us here in this
Us today,
contemporary moment too. This is it's in a way I really hope that this future doesn't come here somehow, but these authoritarian regimes, they feed each other and they learn from each other, and I think as creators it is our job to learn from each other as well, and see, and this is a great way to do that.
Thank you so
This
much.
book, yeah.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Thank you. We still have room for a couple of questions. Go ahead.
Do you think, do you consider that sometime you will return back to Russia?
I mean, I have no idea. I definitely won't go back there until Putin is in power, because I've published so many things against him and his war that, I'll be in jail for 20 years because
I know, but you know that big writers like Dmitry Bykov, they always told that they will return back and will live in прекрасной России будущего.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I'm very practical. I'm not the type of person who lives in like a fantasy realm. Like, I don't see in the near future that anything will change, honestly. Like, I hate to be a pessimist, but for the next, 10 years, I don't see anything changing. At least while Putin is alive, and he feels really well, I think. Like, he's pretty healthy, unfortunately. So while he's alive, nothing is going to change. But then if he dies, for example, if if he gets killed by someone, if there's, some plot to kill him, then who's going to get the power, right? Maybe it's going to be even worse. Like who knows? So I'm not, I can't plan my future thinking that there will be a beautiful Russia
So you're
in the
not dreaming
future.
about it?
I'm not even thinking about that. It's like, if it happens,
Then you'll think about it.
Then I'll think
Yeah,
about
yeah.
it. Yeah.
I do actually have one more question. Somebody else says for both of you, because we were talking about it earlier, but I realized that both of your novels, you represent a meeting. Your character meets a KGB man, and your character Maya, she ends up in a complicated work situation, but she meets a man from FSB, representative of power, and you write a really credible, really well balanced dialogue, and he actually becomes sort of a mentor to her, a really a kind of a wise man in the novel to give her advice about her life, and so I'm really curious. I want to ask both of you. So like, it feels like it takes guts just to write that, put that on the paper, that kind of meeting with secret service agents who are the scary part comes from the fact that it's hard to imagine their psychology. How does one become such a person, and how do you accurately represent their way of thinking on the page? How do you explain that kind of thinking through dialogue to readers? How do you make them believable, not cartoonish, or not, yeah. So
That's an interesting question. Yes. When I was writing that character, the FSB general, I was just trying to basically explain it to myself Like, how do you become part of that structure? Because I'm sure that the FSB, it's their number is actually not is classified like how people belong to the FSB, but I think they number in the hundreds of thousands. So I was just thinking, not every single one of them is a completely terrible person, right? So there must be some people who are at least halfway decent, because but they ended up in the structure for like a number of reasons. Who knows why, right? Maybe somebody's father was a KGB general, and then they just went into their father's footsteps, and then by the time they realized that this whole thing was completely terrible, and but it was too late to switch careers or something. So this is where I was coming from. I was just trying to imagine myself basically in the shoes of this person who ended up making a career in the FSB, but maybe he's not 100% terrible. I don't know.
I think what is interesting about a place like Russia, but also the entire Soviet Union, is that through its Soviet history, almost every family had somebody who was in some way either working for the Secret Service or informing on other people. And to me, that's like the tragedy that defines to this day, because I think it changed a lot of people's psychology. It reflects on when Soviet Union fell apart, there was this idea of like opening the archives so that you could see what happened to your whoever, like grandpa that was sent to the gulag. And a couple of years later, they started closing it because you would find out that the person who informed on the grandpa is like your neighbor, Ivan or whatever. And so there could be, like if half the country is essentially informing on another half of the country, like psychologically, that's a terrible country to run. And so, I mean, even now, I was thinking about it actually on the way here after a conversation we had earlier today, like how much squabbling there is to this day in this country. There's like the reason political opposition in Russia, in my opinion, cannot do anything with Putin is because, okay, Navalny's dead, but the fucking squabbling is just like endless. Sorry for swearing. And I think it like in some way to me, like I'm more and more getting convinced that it defines kind of the soul, the Russian soul in some ways to today, which is why it's such a problem. In my novel, I wrote the KGB scene takes place in the 80s. So like it's not a current situation. And I was trying to enter it with an idea of like, okay, the 80s, like things, it's not Stalin time. It's like not the dawn, the other way, the sunset of the country. And so I'm like, they probably don't, the KGB officers are probably not like dire believers in the dream of communism. Like things are not looking great in the 80s. And so that's kind of what I was thinking about, like how can this scene represent kind of the general state of things where he's gonna like do his job and say mean things and scare the person who's in the opposite chair from the KGB officer, but he's not gonna like, he's not gonna go all the way. He's not gonna send this poor schmuck to like the gulag anymore. It's kind of beyond that.
Great. Yeah, I mean it's really well done in both books, and it's that number, over the 100,000. I haven't actually heard that, and
I think it's like maybe 400,000.
That's pretty staggering to think about.
My elementary teacher was recruited. She wasn't recruited. She said no, but she told us that they were trying to recruit her. I have a classmate who is an FSB, I think, pretty high up. My mother-in-law's dad was in the KGB. Like it's everywhere. It's this is why it's so in the grips of this thing. Positive note. You
Can I ask a writery question? Totally self-serving. Can you tell us a little bit more about the writing process for this novel? Like, walk us through it. I mean, obviously, zombie Lenin, that's right there for the taking, because he's already a zombie. Right? The most terrifying thing a child will ever see, by the way, is Lenin's body in the mausoleum. So tell me, like, what was easy about the writing process, and what was not so fun? Maybe you don't wish to relive that part. Give us the behind the scenes pain and
So
suffering and
there's
joy.
almost nothing to say because the writing of this novel was very straightforward and easy. It just wrote itself basically. I wrote it in a year, which is not representative of how I write in general. Because with all of my other novels, it took years and years and a lot of like thinking and reshuffling. But this novel was just straightforward. I don't know why. It just maybe it has to do with the material, or maybe because I was so angry with what was happening. I have no idea, but it's just, I just kind of started writing it and continued straight to the end. There was almost no editing at any stage, which is mind blowing, honestly, because usually I do a lot of editing. So, yeah.
So
This is just like an outlier.
Five out of five, you'd recommend you do it again.
It's like an easy kid.
Yeah.
Just like, how did I get
So
this easy?
Yeah,
Well,
but
you
I don't
have
think
to stop
I don't
now,
think I
just
can
so
like repeat this experience. It's just
Sasha started to speak about the position, and I remember that in your book, the protagonist, let's call him a boyfriend, worked to FBK for some time. This is the independent organization founded by Navalny that investigates corruption. Given the facts that we're witnessing right now about the corruption inside the organization itself, what is your take on FBK and the future of Russian opposition, if any?
I mean, I don't have any take. I'm a helpless watcher of those squabbles, as I'm sure we all are. And it terrifies me what's going on because, I don't know, Navalny's legacy deserves better, obviously. And I don't know why they're just like quarreling constantly instead of actually doing something. And just fun fact, I once reached out on Facebook to a person who then worked for FBK, and I said, it was like I have a public profile and you can like Google me. And I said, I'm a journalist and a writer. I want to volunteer for FBK, like use me for something. I can do something. And they were like, oh yeah. So I'm gonna give you a number, like text this number. I texted this person and she just added me to some creepy chat where people were planning like rallies on Brighton Beach and what kind of like wording they would use for krichalki, like shouting slogans. And I'm like, what is this? This is crazy. This is what they're offering. And I just deleted myself from the chat. So I guess it speaks volumes about what's happening there. I don't know. Maybe they have no real interest, but at the same time, they continue to do things because I was just defending them to my husband, who said they're completely useless. Like, what are you talking about? And I said, no, but they're doing these investigations. They're sending them to the European Union leaders, for example, and then a lot of people get sanctioned. Like a lot of people lose their like yachts and their villas in Spain and in Italy. That's because of what they're doing. So they're still doing something, and I respect them for it. It's just that, like it's not very organized, obviously, and they shouldn't spend time on, bad mouthing each other, obviously.
Yeah, just in your book, it looks like the characters, when he's announcing that he works for them, he's kind of proud, and this is like the gold standard of the proper organization and how he can spend his efforts, right?
Yeah, but
fighting
a few years back.
Yeah, so let's say you write this book right now. Would you write about it in the same manner, or
Probably not.
probably not?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, with that, let's wrap up the official conversation and we can move to book signing and tea. And feel free to ask Sveta more questions.
Thank you all
more
for
privately.
coming.
Thank you.